So our study is entitled Therapeutic Community, Its Impact to the Rehabilitation and Reformation of Female PDLs. Let's have a brief introduction about the correctional administrations of the Philippines. In the country, there are two approaches for the treatment of offenders. These are the institutional and non-institutional corrections. And in the institutional corrections, it is practiced in facilities, hence the name institution, like that of the prisons, jails, and other penal institutions. And it is in the institutional corrections that the therapeutic community is adopted and practiced. Now let's talk about the goals of the correctional administration. There are two broad goals of the CA. It aims for number one, the rehabilitation, and number two, the reformation of the offenders. Now, what is therapeutic community? Therapeutic community is a structured method and environment for changing human behavior in the context of community life and responsibility. It also helps them to be pro-social and engaged in the right living. Thus, it contributes to the goals of the corrections. Now, what about BJMP? Ladies and gentlemen, the BJMP is one of the correctional institution, and under this, the BJMP implements the therapeutic community program that provides an environment for helping the offenders at the same time maintain the recovery and reformation of the offenders. We now proceed to the literatures that were utilized in our research. First is from Srivani 2006, where it was defined that therapeutic community is one in which community members work with one another to promote self-change. And also, this study stated that therapeutic community encourages participants to be positive role models for one another under the guidance of TC staffs and rules and regulations of the organization. When it comes to the legalities, we have here RA 1077, also known as the Amendment of the Probation Law of 1976. RA 1077 provides a mandate for formulating a humane system that will promote the reformation of the offenders. And from this Republic Act, we get to know that therapeutic community is actually supported by law. Another significant study is from Abitler et al. It was actually used as our main resource on our research study. It is entitled The Effectiveness of Therapeutic Community Modality Program implemented on Batangas City Jail, and it was published on European Journal of Research in Social Sciences. So the important findings derived in this study is that they have found out that the interventions of the therapeutic community were effective in the rehabilitation of PDLs, not only from the religious activities but up to the educational programs. We move on to the methodology. So in our research design, we used qualitative approach because it is the approach that gather in-depth insights into the problems using non-numerical data to understand people's beliefs, experiences, attitudes, behavior, and interaction. We find it as the most appropriate approach to understand how the TC impacts the rehabilitation and reformation of offenders through the use of words as a medium of data. Meanwhile, the case study type is where we obtain an in-depth research in the therapeutic community as the main subject of our study, and this type will help us to understand the functionality and successes of the therapeutic community by assessing how it impacted the rehabilitation of the PDLs. The next is the data gathering tool, which are of course the interview questionnaires and interview guides. Originally, our group has decided for oral interview, but due to the present circumstances, the facility instructed us to reduce it to interview questionnaires instead, and so we did. As for the data gathering procedure, as a disclaimer, first, in the light of the pandemic, we have to abide with the protocols and restrictions provided by the IATF, the city jail, and the university in gathering the data. After the approval of the communication letters, we also obtained the consents from the participants for ethical consideration before getting the data. The questionnaires were then dropped at the city jail by online errand services and floated by the BJMP personnel themselves. The exchange of information is limited to text messaging and emails only. So finally, to the treatment of our data, the gathered data was analyzed through thematic analysis. Thematic analysis is a method used to find out something about the views, opinions, knowledge, and experiences of the participants. The process of thematic analysis adapted by the researchers was based on the discussions of Caulfield 2009 published on Scrib. Firstly, the transcripts of the responses from the respondents are collated all together for general overview muna before starting with the analysis. The next step was coding, where shorthand labels were derived by the researchers from the responses of the participants and then categorized together according to the relation or relevance of the ideas from one another. The final step of thematic analysis is where the final themes were then generated from the codes and the categories. Now let us talk about the summary of the findings. In relation to the first SOP, it was learned that the activities experienced by the PDLs in the TC are manageable, enjoyable, and it sparks their interest in doing such activities. We can see here that the activities are achievable for them, thus they are encouraged to be dutiful with it. In response to the second SOP, it was determined that the TC helps the participants develop their holistic growth, increase their self-worth, and taught them to be contented in life. These are the paramount effects that the TC provides for the female PDLs. Lastly, the findings for the third SOP would entail that PDLs struggle inside the TC because of having low self-esteem, especially in the beginning phases of their involvement in the TC. But it is noteworthy that they are overcoming the same struggles by establishing positive social interactions with others, that is also with the aid of the TCMP. And in conclusion, the the PDLs acknowledge that the TC helps them in their betterment. Basically, it says that the PDLs finds TC as the connecting bridge from the jail facility back to the mainstream society. It is through the TC that they are remolded with positive learnings, taught of ways how to be productive, virtuous, and taught how to abide with the pro-social norms that they can use to be qualified and safely return back to the community. The TC also helps them overcome the internal and external challenges, which means that the TC does not only develop their extrinsic capabilities such as their socialization and communication skills, but it also helps them to grow their intrinsic abilities such as coping mechanisms, decision-making skills, and wider perception in life. As for the limitations of the study, the population was limited to female PDLs only as a way of delimiting it, and mainly because in our RRL, there was a study that concluded females as more receptive to the TCMP because they tend to embrace ideas of change, and that females are proven to be less likely to return to correctional institutions since they are able to adapt well once they are reintegrated back to the society. That is, of course, with the learnings acquired from the TC again. And for our informed opinion, the TC has a promising result as reflected by local and international studies because the TC teaches them how to live in an upright manner, which is a quality of an individual that has been truly reformed and rehabilitated. We think that TC can be a major breakthrough of permanently changing the behaviors of the offenders. Now, let us proceed with the final part, the recommendations. The BJMP could develop more activities that is geared in developing the confidence of the female PDLs because it is the area where the respondents are mostly challenged. Thus, it is recommended for further improvements. We also, second, we also want to see how the TCs are implemented in different areas or regions of the country and may somehow come up with a centralized evaluation of the TCMP that is national in scope. And we also want or we recommend further studies about male PDLs in the TCs to determine the significant differences, if any. Overall, we really think that TC is a very powerful tool that can be used for the reformation of offenders, yet it is seemingly underrated and not widely recognized, even in the corrections community. So, with this concern, we hope that our study would help in bringing this matter into a brighter spotlight so that more attention can be drawn to its improvements and patronization. I guess that wraps up our presentation of our study entitled Therapeutic Community, Its Impact to Rehabilitation and Reformation of PDLs. As we come to the end of our finals, our group extends gratitude to our research advisor, Ma'am Cha, to our instructor, Ma'am Leia, and as well as to our distinguished panelists who took their time in being with us in this journey. Thank you, everyone, for participating.